So when we talk about the onboarding process includes a couple of steps. Like, if I just go back here and you see here, we have a single server that can be onboarded. So what would happen is when you generate a script by clicking here, it actually gives you a PowerShell script and you need to enter your credentials. So it's like Microsoft.com/device registration logon would initiate, and then you need to log in with your current user ID and a password. And if you have a permissions, then this script gets success and the server will be added to the Azure ARC. And now thinking about it, let's say you want to onboard hundreds of servers, then definitely this is not the right solution, right? Let's say you want to deploy this with your a group policy or with Intune or maybe with SCCM or some kind of script to remotely execute. It's not going to work out. So this is not the best option, but yes, it is the best option in case if you have only one server. Now we could do the same thing with a multiple servers by generating a sample script. What it will happen is it actually works very similar to the script, but it will not prompt for the user ID and the password, or it will not prompt you to log in from a portal to onboard the server. So how this is going to work is in the back end, you need to create something called a service principles. So a service principal is a concept that is available within the Azure to grant a permissions with the help of service principal. So if you add service principal permissions, you could onboard or you could gain that permission. It's like just like in your on-premises you have the service accounts, right? Similarly, this is also a kind of service principal which will not ask you to again enter a passcode or password. So we would be using this method, and also we would be using this. As a first step, I would like to use a single server, and later point I would go with this. So quickly we will click on single server, generate a script. So like any other script to work properly, you need to have a proper requirements, right? Pre-requirements to be met. So these are the pre-requirements in this case. So if you see pre-request, or you need to have the URLs or the port should be open on a 4443 with the required URLs. You could look at these outbound URLs, and also you need to have the local admin permissions, and you need to be able to connect to the internet so that it's going to actually download in the back end even the MSI file, a couple of things, and then it would actually create it. Or you could also create a connectivity instead of over the public cloud, over the internet. You can have your own private endpoint so that your connectivity would happen backend within the Azure routes. So you have multiple options. So in our case, we do not have a private endpoint, so I'm going to use the public. So I'll simply click on next, and then it's going to ask you to hey, you want to onboard, but where do you want to onboard? If you remember, we have actually created, or we do have the uh, Azure ARC service, right? So that's where it's gonna onboard. That's what we wanted. So if you just go here, you should be able to see I wanted to onboard to this, um, and because within this I have onboarded my log analytics and my automation account, all of that for patch management as a solution, right? So I would be choosing here my required resource group, a proper required resource group, and then choosing here public endpoint. As I said, I don't have a private endpoint. Or if you want to create, you should be able to create it from your networks with your VNet, but I don't have here. So I'll be choosing public, and I don't want this should go to Windows or this region to East US. Instead, West US 3. That's where my log analytics and my automation account is available. Click on that and make sure that you give here the required configuration details. Let's say, uh, where is this? What is this data center? So in my case, it could be, I can say ARC enabled example, or maybe you call it your California example, or maybe your city, all of that information, so that it actually helps you in order to identify from an automation point of view or from a billing point of view, right? Now let's understand about the script which has created. If you see here, so if you see here, it just generated the script and it is saying that, hey, you need to run this from a PowerShell command. That's true, we should be able to run it from a PowerShell. But if you see here, let's understand the script. The first thing first, it actually configure or included my subscription ID, my resource group, my tenant ID, my location, authentication token, and authentication token is actually gonna give it in case if you're choosing the onboard multiple servers, then it's going to give you here another additional line, 2 line would be added. Rest of the entire script remains same. And also if you see here, it's going to actually invoking a URL, short URL. Okay, so if you just open up this URL, what it is, it's actually a script within that additional script, right? So you're invoking additional script to download to this location as the output, and then you're going to execute the same PowerShell script. So this is a PowerShell script that is going to invoke to download, and later point it's going to execute. So this requires the run as admin, and it's going to completely run as a silently. And you should be able to see here somewhere it's going to download the MSI also. Let me search it. Yeah, if you see here, it's actually invoking a web request to see whether this is running. And MSI, if you just search it, this is where it's actually downloading the package. There's a section, it's downloading. It's gonna onboard, and the script is completely signature signed. So if you do any modification, it's not gonna work. But you should be able to do modifications to this script just in case if you want to find out what's going to happen in the backend, or you want to troubleshoot later point in any case if the deployment is not successing, or the ports are blocked or URLs are blocked, then you need to have a verbose to be enabled. Either you can download directly from here, or you could copy every line of this text and then save it to your notepad and add here as a verbose. So I just added here, if you see here, I have added as a verbose so that whatever the steps it is performing in the backend, I wanted to see on my screen. Also, if needed, I should be able to capture the logs also. Let's say an example, the URLs are maybe blocked due to some port restrictions in the network. I should be able to look into it. So once you have copied this entire script, you should be go back to your target server. So in my case, this is my target server, and you could see here host name of the server is inhyd-application server 01. Simply open up your PowerShell and execute as the script, or you could simply entire script can be copy pasted as a text and hit enter, and you should be able to see the text whatever it is doing in the backend. So let me zoom it. Unfortunately I'm not able to zoom. Yeah, if you could see here, it is actually downloading at this point of time to this local location. So it depends on the time it's downloaded. It also download this easy install script, and it was asking for the user account. So why it is asking for the user account is automatically it is prompting. The reason behind, we were actually using the single server onboarding, and we did not save anywhere service principal, right? So it has to enter the user ID and the password of that credentials for the onboarding. So once we have done that, we should be able to onboard the server. So I'll be entering my user account. Once you enter the password, it says that authentication is completed, and you should be able to see here correlation ID, resource ID, what we have given. So based on this information that is available within the script, it is actually gonna onboard. And we should be able to see here debug mode since we have enabled, and you could see here it's able to access these IPs, all of that information in case if it is not able to uh, have any connectivity for these at the proxy level or maybe at your network level, it's not going to work for you. So it's going to give you a detailed information on whatever it is performing the actions, right? So this server got onboarded. Congrats. So let's go back to the portal and close. Go back to Azure ARC. Under services, sorry, under service, you should be able to see the server name, which is showing as a connected. This is a one method of onboarding a single server. Let's give a try to onboard another server, this time with the multiple server mechanism. So within this, as we talked, we need to create the service principal. So as you know, the service principal will store that credentials, secret keys for a specific period. So let's have a look on it, how to create the service principals and how to properly scope your service principals and generate the script to deploy on a multiple devices. Just to show you, if you just go back to Azure Arc and the service principals, this is where it's going to show you in case if you have already configured service principals, right? So if I just go back to the previous screen, these are the pre-requirements. One is these three were the same as onboarding for the single server. And for the multiple server, one extra prerequisite would be Azure Active Directory Service Principal. That's what it needs. So let's have create by clicking on next and simply choose the required resource group. So remember, my friends, in this case, if you're trying to create a service principal, make sure that you have already have one proper resource group, because the uh, giving the permissions on a service principal, it's not recommended to give entire on a subscription. Instead, grant on a specific resource groups. That's how we should be doing. So in our case, we have already have this specific service group, or sorry, the resource group in this case. So there's a resource group is this, and then server details. So I want my server to be part of WestGS 3 and the operating system. So if it is a Linux, you should be able to onboard Linux machines or Windows. You should be able to choose. In my case, it's a Windows. And then my connectivity to happen between my Azure to this Windows box or the public endpoint, not on a private endpoint. In case if you have a private endpoint, you should be able to connect. So now this is where it's going to ask you, hey, do you have any of the service principals? So in my case, if you see here, I do not have any service principals. So in case if you do not have, either you should be able to click on this to create it, or if you go back to Azure Arc server, and then go to service principals, you should be able to create it from here. It's one and the same. So in my case, I'm just creating within this wizard to create it. So create, and this time I'm going to give here, as this is for my ARC, I'm giving here ARC Onboard phase 1 deployment. These are, so I would just consider. And if you see the scoping for granting, so what would happen is, if you see here, it's going to actually, once I click on create, it's going to create a secret key with the user ID and password kind of thing. So you don't need to put your user ID and password. So by using these user ID password, anybody can automatically create anything within the scope level. So the scope is here. So within this, they can work on multiple things. They can onboard, they can create the VM to onboard that configuration within the Azure also. So it's a secure thing. That's why you need to follow a method, not a subscription. Go for the resource group and make sure select the proper resource group. So by doing this, what would happen is, in the back end, it's going to generate a script also later point. When we selected the script for onboarding, we must have to choose a proper OU name. So next thing would be, this is a phase one. I'm just giving as a description, and the valid is only one because it's going to display for everybody on my screen also. So let's say if you try to use that same secret ID and all of that stuff, you should be able to onboard on my Azure portal by using those client secret ID. So which I don't want. That's why I'm just setting to 1 day. And now, so the role assignment, so the permissions that we are going to assign by scoping to a resource group you need to select here. So in this case, there are two options will come up. Okay, so one would be the Azure connected virtual machine onboarding, other one would be the Kubernetes. So Kubernetes clusters. So you should be able to choose based on your requirement. So in my case, I do not have anything to do with the Kubernetes clusters, so I would only choose my Azure connected VM onboarding option and simply click on create. So what it's going to generate is it's going to generate a client ID and a secret ID, and this ID information you should save it with you in a notepad or somewhere, so that it's going to reused another way. Once the script is generated, you need to put this secret ID information. So that being said, just I copy pasted in my notepad somewhere and clicking on done. Now we have these service principal that is already available with the scope to only the specific resource group, right? So adding in a multiple servers to onboard. Again, I'm going back to the same wizard, and this time I've chosen all, and this time it is asking, hey, do you have a service principal? Yes, I do have one with a client ID. If you remember, it was showing the client ID information, but the client's secret we would enter once we completed this. Click on next. And here we need to enter the tags. Tags are very critical in terms of automation or identifying from a billing point of view, or even from the physically where the service are present. For example, in this case, what is the data center that you want to onboard? For example, if this data center is from a LAC, maybe Los Angeles, or maybe a city, all of that information. And apart from that, you should have the custom data center, custom tags also can be configured. So in my case, I'm not choosing much information, proceeding further. And now it's going to ask you, hey, what kind of script you want to use, or the deployment method. Let's say you want a basic script that can be just with a PowerShell, and you should be able to do it, or with a SCCM client, so that it can be onboarded with the SCCM client package, or with a group policy. So if that's the case, you need to download the you need to prepare a remote share, and then put all the required files from there, and then uh, once you put it your domain name and all of that server share information, the devices will automatically onboard based on the script. So you need to copy this, and you need to deploy based on the logon scripts. Now in our case, we would be using the basic script. Complete information is available within this script, and I would like to explain about the script. If you look at this 31 line code in the beginning, it is actually trying to add the client, that's a service principal client ID, and the secret is here we need to enter, so which we already saved in a notepad. So once we download this, we would be modifying this specific script. Within this, you have service principal that you need to enter. So we have already saved that service principal ID, so I'm just entering this and save the script. So we have script is ready now. So all I have to do is I have to onboard by using the script to the another server. So in this case, we have here the server. So in my case, I would go back. This is a plain machine, so like scripts. Just paste this script and I'll execute. How it's gonna do this execution, so I'm just gonna run it. So in my case, as you see that I'm not actually using any kind of SCCM or other tools, so this is also manual, but the only thing is it's not gonna ask you to enter the password. So that's a good thing, a good part, because it has the service principal with the proper client ID and the secret code, which will automatically expire on a specific date and time. So you could execute in this way. So I've just changed the directory to C scripts where the script is available, and simply enter, so that it's gonna execute the entire script. And again, I forgot to choose here this time the debugging option. Just in case if you want to add that, you should be able to add the debug option. That way you would get more information what is going on. But if you see here, it's actually not showing anything because we didn't add any kind of debug information. And if you see here, it's just trying to connect. The connection is completed successfully, and then the percentage and the correlation ID, all of that. So if you see here, it's going to onboard under this specific resource under compute machines, and INHYD app02 would be the machine name. That's a current machine name. If you see here, host name. Oops. So app02. So it will be onboarded. So let me go back to my server. In this case, I'll just close this wizard and go back to the servers. If we do a quick refresh, so another server is onboarded. This is how you would be onboarding your servers to Azure Arc.